Good morning, Adrian Hyland, and I'm a Melbourne author. Thanks, Katy. Yes, well, my latest book is called Canticle Creek, which is a crime novel set in a fictional community northeast of Melbourne. Right, well, the main character is a young female police officer by the name of Jessie Redpath, who's been living in the Northern Territory, gets involved in a case down in Victoria and comes to solve it, I suppose. If I was looking, I suppose the themes for this book are sort of heat and summer and bushfire and blazes and those sort of things. And I'd say if there was a spark that sort of lit the fire of that book, actually people often talk about the spark that lit the fire of their imagination. In my case, that was literally true. I'm a firefighter, a volunteer firefighter. And a few years ago I was out fighting a fire north of Melbourne, and it swung around a lot faster than I expected. Just sort of swept in towards, and I got hit by such a blast of heat and just shocking. It was with such a strength that sort of knocked me back on the truck, and sort of blasted me back onto the floor, and I sort of hit the turf. And as I was sort of the very moment of hitting it, I had this sudden flash that this is the future that awaits us all if we don't do something about climate change, and that as a writer, that's the ideal topic. And that's how I sort of chose this as my theme, I suppose. No, I've written two other novels and one non-fiction book called King Lake 350 about the Black Saturday bushfires. Yes, it's crime, but hopefully it's a little bit more than crime. It's like they're shot through with moments of poetry, humour. I suppose they're all sort of things that can come within the crime genre. And my first two novels, Diamond Dove and Gunshot Road, were set in the Northern Territory, where I lived and worked for many years, working with Indigenous people in North Central Australia. And that's where they're set. This one's published by Ultimo in Sydney. They're a connection to Hardy Grant. I'd say one of the mottos of my life, I have to get this right, there was a beautiful poem I remember reading when I was about 18, by just the line stuck in my mind. It's by Walter Savage Landor, and it goes, I strove with, it's sort of the last thoughts and words of an old dying philosopher, I think it's called, and it goes, I strove with none, for none were worth my strife. Nature I loved, and next to nature art. I warmed both hands the fire of life. It sinks and I am ready to depart. So I think that there are some, as a crime writer, you write about some of the darker things happening in our world, and I see them and I'm terrified of them, especially for my kids' sake. But the only sort of possible consolation for me is through those beautiful twin stars of nature and art. And I'm surrounded by art. A lot of art. Out where I live in St Andrews, there's a lot of artists, and I'm inspired by a lot of a lot of painters. Particularly, I did Chinese in my initial degree at uni, and I read a lot of those. Not that I couldn't read them now, but I can sort of bumble my way through them. But there's this sort of tradition in Chinese of these hermit poets like Cold Mountain, Han Shan and so on. And I find that those sort of people somehow manifesting themselves in some of the characters in my book. And it seems, as you know, it's full of hermit artists living out there, trying to make sense of what they see before them and to reflect the beauty of nature before them. Did you study writing or are you self-taught? No, I never studied writing, but I did literature and languages at uni, so I self-taught in that respect. Yes. If I was starting out now, I still don't think I'd study writing. I'd probably, if I was a young writer working now, I'd probably go and study particle physics or Chinese or something, because I worry about teaching people writing, get too much of the sort of the same. At present, yeah, I've been teaching at La Trobe for the last 20 years or so, in both teaching English as a second language, academic skills, and then in the more recent years teaching creative writing. But the last year or so, I've got a novel I'm desperately trying to finish at present, so I'm doing that full time and have been for the last year or two, yeah. I get a lot of assistance. My wife reads everything I write, and she always tells me when I'm going off on too many tangents or talking through my ass. And but my current book, I'm particularly indebted to the people, so my agent, I should say, Melanie Ostell, and also to the people at Ultimo. My editor was Robert Watkins, and also James Callow was the person who first accepted my book. I've never really done anything other than that, even though my first book took 50 years or whatever to write. But even writing and reading was the first thing I could sort of learnt to read before I even sort of figured it out by myself. I've always read widely, and I tried to write as soon as I was old enough to do it. But I just stuffed around with a lot of different things. I've got a long while to focus. I wrote a lot of poetry, I wrote songs, played music with friends and stuff like that. But it wasn't until maybe 15 years ago that I sort of realised, I published some of those things, but I just sort of realised I was sort of not going anywhere. And then I hit upon the idea of writing crime, which is, it's a genre I love because it's sort of, for someone as sort of aimless as myself, it forces you into a structure. I'd say every part of the process has got aspects of it that I dread and aspects of it that I love. From the initial inspiration is sort of all very inspiring and exciting, but then you've got that long, slow drag of trying to fight off all the other temptations and distractions and translate those images and ideas into readable things on the page. And that's a lot of hard work and, sort of fighting a losing battle against death, I think, as we all are, to get them finished before the end. Have you ever had writer's block? I think I live in a constant state of... I live on the writer's block. Yes, I read books all the time, from every genre. I can't stop. I find I can't write for more than 2 or 3 hours a day. That's a good day's effort for me. And then I find I lose a bit of my focus or something, and I read very, 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 very widely. Coming out here, I just came in via the City Library and picked up Dr. Zhivago, which I've been reading for the last hour on the train. I'm really enjoying that. But no, I read all sorts of... I read poetry every day, and I read a lot of crime. My favourite Australian crime writer was some great ones, but maybe they're still the best we've had is the late great Peter Temple. The last couple of years in the pandemic, in lockdown, the two writers I've come across, I'm just reading non-stop at present, or not, I'm trying to read all their works, Ali Smith, the Scottish writer, who's a brilliant writer, I think, and also Mick Herron as a crime writer. He's very funny, I find. Well, I'm contracted to do another Jesse Redpath book, and unfortunately, I have to get it finished by the end of the year, and I'm trying to overcome my writer's block and my usual slothful habits to get it finished by the end of the year. By November, I think I have to have it in. Thank you, Katy, and the Leaf Bookshop for having me.